So I kind of wanted to show you basically the way I go through the class is I learn everything via they teach everything via modeling. So I just want to show you what a really good online lesson looks like. So this is a pathway, and this is how students see pathways. They click it, and then things open one at a time out to the side. And I had never really taken the time to build a pathway until I took this course because it does have a lot of moving parts. It's not quick. And I think a lot of times when we're doing things and it's learning, we are getting things in there quickly so that we can move to the next thing. But the process of building a pathway actually is exceptionally beneficial in a lot of ways. And I'll show you one that I made this week in a minute. But a couple of things I've learned is number one, you want to kind of have a personality. In the online course that I'm taking, they call it flava. So that's part of their personality is calling things flava instead of flavor. And they play on words. So, like each pathway we do that's building our understanding might be thematically related to the concept of flava in different ways. We do have very specific design rules. We should make the very first heading extra, extra large, and then all of the rest of the any kind of thing that we build um, extra large. And I'll show you the editing tools in a minute and how to use them if you've never played with these kind of rich text pages. The other thing that they've taught us to do is give an overview of what they're about to learn. These overviews can be quite simple or they can be kind of in depth. Uh, let's see. Also, part of this slide in the pathway is teaching us a little bit about procedures. And it's helping us understand um, how an asynchronous experience should work. Uh, so I think it's a really good idea to maybe spend a little time thinking about your own procedures and how, I'm sure you're all learning different things, what types of questions you didn't consider, but now you know because you had so many of a certain one, that kind of thing. And so it can help to respond to the things that you're noticing. Sometimes it really isn't just the presentation. Um, and for instance, if you're going to do online discussions, one thing I learned from last week is a good thing to do is literally take the time and ask them, pose questions where they respond to you um, about what they think a discussion should be like, that kind of stuff. And then you can create procedures from their interactions, which increases their ownership. And it's so easy to use things like Flipgrid. You don't have to use Google Meet or Teams. You can use something where they're also actively engaging in the discussion, and then you can take it and turn it into something. I want to show you how they break up content. So, here's the flava, and this is actually a sticker they had made, uh, and we all got one the first night. Notice the design consistency. You have this extra, extra large. One thing I forgot to mention, notice if they use a color, they use one, they don't use a bunch. I kind of break that rule a little bit, and you'll sort of see my style in a minute. Um, but this is kind of how they're teaching us to do it so that the kids don't get overwhelmed. Just notice that it's a very quick and easy thing to read, and you just use the bold to highlight things. Now, so this kind of introduces you to some kind of concept they want you to consider. Then they may throw in some kind of reflective moment, whether we have to tweet it or have a discussion post. and they'll tell us if we have to um, respond to one another and in what format, that kind of thing. Here is a modeled product, also, though, modeling the content of what should be in the product. So you're not only learning. Now, this was making a commercial that sort of was an onboarding experience for our class, was one of our first projects. So it goes through and it teaches us a concept. They wanted to teach us the wifey. So notice too, their modeling style, because they keep coming up with these little cute ways that they talk about things. And so the idea is when you introduce things to them, you have to tell them what's in it for them. And so they take us through a good amount of content, actually. And so notice they'll introduce the content, then they'll embed the content. They may embed whatever their questions are, whatever things they want you to know. Um, they will model where they're taking you with varied types of technology. So that's another thing. The more you get used to the technology, the more the things you have them doing will be technologically based. So you have to kind of move your mind towards thinking about how to use technology to learn rather than the sort of way that we do it in a classroom. It's kind of hard to get used to for some. And so here's an onboarding video that they use to model Biteable for us. And and that's another thing. They always give us a high quality model. And it's another way they build feedback in. So they love Flipgrid as a way to stop and think and consider. Uh, they keep the assignments very short. Uh, and notice too, because this section of information had all these little moments where it broke up and it had a good amount of overview of content, they do stop and recap. And then they remind you of whatever the assignment is, where it needs to be. They embed, where you need to find your information. They give us instructions on how they want us to post too. So they're literally teaching us how to do things like embed a link or embed a YouTube video and how to use code. Coding is very simple within the It's Learning platform and within an app. All apps allow you to use code, so you're not creating your own code, but basically they will give us guidelines as to what our post should be like. And then these guidelines are also models. And then once we did whatever we were supposed to do, we were supposed to say yes, and that moves you to the next thing. Um, Twitter is also a way that they get us to engage with one another. They turn Twitter almost into a PL community. And so that's another way to create engagement. Definitely, again, they also break it up not only through text, but through these very short, punchy videos. And so that's another thing to keep in mind because there's so many different types of learners that they are trying to kind of differentiate for all learners by design rather than differentiating when they ask questions. And then, they have all kinds of ways that you do reflections. I think this one was private. I was able to answer some questions and I followed the directions about my post. But again, notice my instructor is interacting with me, giving me some interesting feedback. And feedback, again, that I think is encouraging. It makes me feel very connected. And then finally, um, they will end with a slide that's all very connected to recap. Did you do this? And from a parental perspective, my daughter actually started online learning in early March, March 3rd. We transferred her to Forsyth Virtual Academy. And so, as parents, being on the receiving end of content being delivered, in these ways, we've started to realize what can be very confusing or frustrating. And so, if you feel like you're being scrutinized in things, just know it is because the technology, if it's not used correctly, can create frustration. And I will say, one way I know some of the confusion that we've felt in the presentation of information has to do with um, overviews not being in the pathway, overviews just being in the planner and not having a specific overview of information and then a specific recap. So, for my husband, who was on a huge learning curve and who had never used any of this technology, going through these pathways without them being as well organized as they should have been, or at least how I'm being trained to do them, um, what created stress in the household. So, just wanted to give you that perspective because I think that's what our entire community is feeling. And so we have to keep that in mind that the questions, the scrutiny, those types of things aren't meant to hurt us. And some of the questions definitely can make us better. Okay, so I just wanted you to see a lesson that I learned from that I thought was very well done and a model for you. And then I'm going to, show you how I built a pathway on my next video. Thanks. Bye.